Takže přistoupíme k našemu poslednímu významnému vystupujícímu, a to je pan Serge Tomasi, zástupce ředitele Direktorátu pro rozvojovou spolupráci OECD, který bude mít prezentaci na téma, jak může zahraniční rozvojová spolupráce podpořit soukromé investice v rozvojových zemích. So, Mr. Tomasi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. If I may, I will take the floor from my seat because I have a lot of paper to manage and it will be better. First, good morning everyone, and I would like to warmly thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for its kind invitations to present the ongoing DAC work. The DAC is the Development Assistance Committee located in OECD in Paris, and currently we are working on development finance and how to better support private investment in developing countries. Therefore, in my presentations, I would like to address two main topics. In the first part, I will present the development landscape and how the developing countries are playing a growing role in the global economy, the global economic growth, and why economic growth, private investment, job creation are so important for the developing countries. And in the second part, I will focus more on the actions, programs provided by donor agencies to support private investment. And at the end, I will present the ongoing work to build a new tracking system, a more comprehensive tracking system of public financing for development, going beyond ODA, official development assistance. So the first, the starting point, it is with big shift in the global economy with this growing role played by the developing economy. On the screen, you have the share of OECD countries and non-OECD countries, mainly the developing countries, in the global economy. And you know that since for the first time in 2011, the share of the developing economies, the non-OECD economies in the global GNP is more than 50%. And by 2030, the share of developing economy should represent around 60% of the global GNP, while they presented only 38% in 1990. Of course, the emerging countries are playing the leading role, in particular China, which represents around 15% of the current global GNP. But the shift is more impressive if you look at the respective contributions of OECD and non-OECD countries to the global economy. Take into account that the projections of economic growth in OECD countries are around 2% per year. Over the next 30 years, the developing countries should be the main drivers of global growth. There is an agreement among the main IOs, international organizations, that while economic growth rate will decrease slightly in the BRICS, economic growth in middle-income countries and low-income countries should be boosted, including in Africa. As you know, in 2011, 6 of the 10 countries with the highest economic growth rate were in sub-Saharan Africa, including some least developed countries such as Ethiopia, that presented an economic growth of 11% per year over the last 5 years. With the slide on the screen, I don't know if it's easy to read. Yes, you can see, for instance, that the Chinese annual economic growth will be reduced by 7.2% by 2020 and to 3% by 2050. You have the same trends in other BRICS countries, such as India, Mexico, or South Africa, while economic growth should increase in the rest of the world, mainly Africa and South Asia. The trend is supported both by a growing investment effort linked to the rapid population growth and urbanization, and the increase of the middle class that has access to more manufactured goods. On this new slide, you see that there is also a rapid increase of the GNI per capita, mainly in emerging countries, but also in low-income countries. Our OECD projections over the next 40 years show that the GNI per capita in China could reach $49,000 by 2050, a level that is currently the GNI per capita of the US citizens. Currently, it is $46,000 in the US. And over the same period, the GNI per capita in India could increase from $4,000 to more than $27,000. And taking into account the size of the populations in emerging countries, China, India, Indonesia, this will have a huge impact on the global GNP that could increase by fourfolds between 2010 and 2060. You can see on this screen, you have in bronze the OECD countries with a slow growth rate. You have the BRICS in orange with a slight increase, and in green you have the rest of the world. It means the non-OECD country and the non-BRICS country, and you can see that they will play a growing role in the global GNP. And on this slide, you have the population growth. You know that we will reach around 9 billion of people in 2050. And you can see again in green that the main increase will come from the developing countries, beyond OECD and emerging countries. This explains what a report of OECD released 3 years ago by our development center presented as the switch of wealth from the northwest to the southeast. Therefore, a lot of economists think that the future of growth and the growing opportunities for private investment will be in developing countries. The tremendous needs in basic infrastructures, mainly regarding transportations, access to energy and water, and the growing size of the middle class in these countries will feed the economic growth path over the midterm. This is the situation, as you know, in China, where the domestic demand is playing a growing role in the national GNP, with both the increase of the GNP per capita and the continuing domestic investment effort. Indeed, Justin Lin, a Chinese economist who has been the chief economist of the World Bank several years ago, told me recently that urbanization is still relatively low in China compared to what it was in the US and Europe at the same level of GNI per capita. Therefore, the investment in infrastructure and real estate will be strong drivers of economic growth over the next 20 years, as well in Africa. Currently, as you know, 2/3 of the African population has no access to electricity. And this long-term trend explains why the development is moving quickly with a new focus on economic growth and private investment. Indeed, while the first MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, endorsed by the UN General Assembly in 2001 was very focused on human capital, the IOs and development economists are now putting more attention to financing infrastructure, financing economic growth, and agriculture. Everybody knows that the MDG 1, that was to reduce absolute poverty by half between 1990 to 2015, has been achieved in 2008. Indeed, the rate of global population living below the absolute poverty line, that is established at 1.25 US dollars per day, has been achieved in 2008. While the share of the global population living with only 1.25 US dollars per day was 42% in 1990, it has been reduced to 24% in 2008. But everybody recognizes the major role played by China, with 600 million people left out absolute poverty in China, compared to 800 million at the global level. And the main reasons for this success has been the rate of economic growth, more than 9% per year in real terms over the period. On the screen, you have the trend with and without China. The blue line is with China, and you can see the impact of the Chinese efforts in the global result. And a key challenge is to boost economic growth and food productions in developing countries, taking into account the current population growth. And this is a particular challenge in Africa. I was 2 weeks ago in Washington for the World Bank Assembly, and I met some finance ministers from African LDCs, least developed countries. They all highlighted the importance of economic growth and job creations in Africa, and therefore the need to better focus development cooperation on financing private investment and basic infrastructures. Indeed, although its growing economic growth, around 5 to 6% per year in Africa, Africa is facing a specific challenge. You can see on this new slide that while there is a slight decrease in the share of the African population living below the absolute poverty line, from 57 to 88% in 2008, there is a specific challenge because Africa is the only regions where you have had an increase of the absolute number of people living in absolute poverty over the last decade, over the last 20 years. In 1990, you can see at the below, for sub-Saharan Africa, we had 289 million of people living in absolute poverty in 1990, and in 2008, they were 386 million of people. This is mainly the result of a low economic growth rate during the 90s, and of course the high population growth rate over the period. Another key factor is the lack of industrializations in sub-Saharan Africa. On this new slide, you can see on the below, the green line, that the share of the manufacturing industry as share of the global GNP in Africa has not increased over the last 40 years. This explains that the economic growth in Africa is less job-intensive than it is in Latin America or Asia. You can see on this screen that in 2010, the share of the manufacturing industry in the African GNP is around 10%. the same share that it was in 1970. And so there is a huge challenge in Africa that is to create more jobs, more commercial activities, more investment to create more jobs. China, again, is playing a role in this regard. Indeed, to face the growing labor cost, the Chinese have started to establish some manufactories in low-income countries, including in Africa. For instance, last September, we hosted a workshop in OECD in Paris with China on how to strengthen our dialogue on development cooperation between the DAC members and the Chinese authorities. And a Chinese CEO of a Chinese manufactory established in Ethiopia, producing some shoes for the European and the US market, has explained to us that the production cost of his factory in Addis Ababa were 24% lower than the same factory in the south of China, mainly because of the lower labor cost in Ethiopia. And therefore, they think that they will establish more and more manufacturing factory in Africa to benefit from this low labor cost. Now I would like to move to the second part and how development cooperation support economic growth and private investment in developing countries. Development agencies have traditionally worked with developing countries to promote conditions for a dynamic productive sector, strengthening the role of individual initiative, private enterprise, and the market system. To help developing countries improve their investment climate, development agencies support interventions that, one, lower the cost of investment. For instance, the cost of complying with the policy, legal and regulatory frameworks in which the private sector operates, including the extra cost created by inadequate infrastructure, crime or corruption. Second, reduce risk. These involve policy and institutional reforms that improve the stability of the investment climate and the predictability of returns on investment, including by making the implementations of regulations established by national government more predictable. Third, improve competition. A more competitive investment climate improves efficiency, encourages innovations, and is a key factor driving productivity improvements in the short run. And fourth, develop capacity. Reforming the investment climate is a political process and relies on effective institutions and the ability of the private sector to identify key constraints to investment and to lobby for and help implement change. Let me also highlight some key actions of the development agency. First, regarding reducing private sector risk. The significant risk to doing business in developing countries, especially the fragile states, can be mitigated via loans, guarantees, and other debt and equity instruments. As early as 1951, the Lewis Report recommends the establishment of an institution to make equity investment and to lend to private undertakings. The International Finance Corporation was established as affiliate of the World Bank Group with the purpose to further economic development by encouraging the growth of productive private enterprise in member countries, particularly in the least developed areas. And for a long time, some bilateral agencies have developed this kind of market-based instruments. Mainly the French, with the Agence Française de Développement and its affiliate Proparco, that is specialized in supporting private investment, or the German with the KfW. But currently, other donors that were traditionally more focused on poverty agenda and grants are developing new institutional capacity to better support private investment. It is, for instance, today a key priority for Sweden or the UK, but also in Australia or in the US. And to support private investment is clearly a growing priority for the DAC members in order to boost economic growth, job creations, and poverty reductions in low-income countries. It is, for instance, estimated that guarantees for development purposes extended by DAC donor government and IFIs mobilized over 15 billions of US dollars of private sector flows to developing countries between 2009 and 2011. But much more can be done. Another key priority of the donors, of course, is to finance infrastructure. As you know, an assessment achieved for the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, a G8 initiative launched to support financing for infrastructure in Africa, highlighting that the first obstacle to be overcome to boosting economic growth in Africa is the lack of infrastructure. The report released 4 years ago estimating that the lack of infrastructure is responsible for a loss of GNP of 2% annually in Africa. And you can see on this screen the 10 top providers of support to infrastructures with the World Bank Group at the first rank. The total amount of resources provided by donors for infrastructure was 45 billion in 2011, including 60% of ODA and 40% of non-concessional resources. Over the past 10 years, official development financing for infrastructures has been tripled. And on this slide, I wanted to share with you this slide because it is focused on official financing flows for energy, for the energy sector. And you can see the dramatic increase of the non-concessional flows. In red, you have the grants, and in green, you have the non-concessional flows. You can see on this screen that in 2001, 2002, a large share of the financing allocated into the energy sector was financed with grants in red. And now, 60%, more than 60%, in fact 66%, is financed through non-concessional flows. Non-concessional loans or guarantees or private equity. And this is really important because we think that more and more economic activities could be financed with non-concessional flows. And it's also important regarding the new geography of poverty, because over the last 40 years, we have had a growing heterogeneity regarding the economic trajectory of the developing countries. And more developing countries have an important economic growth, but they have always to face with poverty. As you know, in 1980, 85% of the global population living in absolute poverty were living in low-income countries. Now, 66% of the global population living in absolute poverty is living in middle-income countries. And sometimes in emerging countries such as China, India, Indonesia. So we have also to address the question of poverty in middle-income countries. And we think that it is more efficient to use non-concessional loans or low-concession loans to tackle poverty in middle-income countries and to refocus the grants and ODA on the low-income countries. I will go back on this point. I wanted also to highlight another very important point, that is aid for trade. Indeed, a main change over the past 20 years is the development of global value chains, characterized by the fragmentations of production processes at the global scale. A clear added value of the globalizations and the liberalization of international trade over the past 20 years has been to boost the industrialization process in a large range of developing countries. The liberalization of international trade and the fragmentation of the production processes offer developing countries new economic opportunities with a better integrations in the international trade and industrialization process. Since 2006, the OECD and the WTO have brought the trade and development communities together with the aim of helping poor countries benefit from the opportunities offered by the international trade for shared prosperity. The two IOs released every 2 years a flagship report, Aid for Trade at Glance. The last report, released in June 2013, addressed the issue of connecting to value chains and the role of development finance. This report analyzes the strategies, priorities, and programs from the public and private sectors in developing and developed countries to connect developing countries' suppliers to value chains. And the main innovation of this 2013 report was the fact to monitor, beyond the view of donors and recipient countries' government, also the view of the private sector. Indeed, 524 supplier firms in developing countries provided the perspective on the barriers they face in linking to value chains, while 17 free lead firms, mainly multinational firms in OECD countries, highlighting the obstacles they face in integrating developing country firms in their value chain. You have on this screen the result of this survey with the main constraints highlighted by the private sector on how to connect to the value chains. The suppliers in developing countries all rank the lack of access to trade finance as the main barriers to entering, establishing, or moving up value chains. The developing countries on the screen are in bold. You can see in blue the access to finance that is clearly the main obstacles highlighted by the private firms in developing countries. They also, of course, highlighted transportation and shipping costs, the business environment, and certification requirement as the main other obstacles. Regarding the multinational firms, they rank in first the transportation cost, but they also point to custom procedures, licensing requirements, and the business environment as obstacles to integrate developing country suppliers into their value chains. The results of these surveys are very important to better focus aid for trade provided by donors in the right priorities, to the right priorities. You can see also on this new slide the growing donors' commitment to expand aid for trade from less than 26 billion of US dollars in 2002-2005 to 54 billion in 2012. That means that aid for trade volume has doubled over the last decade. Aid for economic infrastructure represents 57% of the total, with an effort focused on building roads as well as electricity generations and transmissions. I would like now to move to my last point, the development finance landscape. The landscape of development finance flows to developing countries has evolved in volume terms. External resources transferred to developing countries in the form of either development assistance or private flows more than doubled from 2000 to 2012. You can see on the next slide, on this slide, that the share of the private flows, FDI and bond and security, was around 45% of the total of external flows to developing countries in 2012, compared to 18% for ODA. If you look on the right side, you can see at the bottom ODA. Total ODA is representing now 18% of the total external flows to the developing countries, while private flows, I mean private investment and bond and security, are representing 45%. You have to be aware that in 1970, when the concept of ODA has been defined by the DAC, the share of the ODA was more than 50% of the total external flows. And now it has been decreasing to 18%. And of course, you have the growing share of other official flows. Indeed, the development financial institutions have long played a role in the financing of difficult energy and infrastructure projects, especially in more challenging investment environment. The new universal aims of DFIS is to provide finance, promote development, and encourage private investment, whilst maintaining the delicate balance between what is affordable and what is commercially sustainable. The DFIS provide non-concessional finance, called other official flows in the DAC language. Other official flows mostly finance economic infrastructure and building productive capacity projects. Net other official flows disbursement have been from 30 billions of US dollars to 50 billions of US dollars in recent years. I would like also just to highlight the importance also of the growing importance of institutional investment. Under the Russian G20 presidency, the G20 leaders committed to encourage the flow of institutional investment, for instance, pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, toward long-term assets such as infrastructure and renewable energy projects in order to strengthen the global economy and deliver more sustainable growth. The report prepared by OECD for the G20 shows that OECD institutional investors manage more than 80 trillions of US dollars that could be partly invested in developing countries. And one of the challenges is to create more incentives to get more resources for the developing countries. Now, I would like to conclude by highlighting the ongoing work of the DAC regarding how to improve the tracking system of public flows to developing countries. Indeed, traditionally, the OECD DAC is in charge of the definition and the tracking of ODA, official development assistance, mainly to compare the donors' efforts and to monitor their commitment to reach the famous 0.7% target. What is the ODA definitions? In ODA, you have three main wording. O for official. You need a public financing from a national or local government in a donor country. The second is D for development. are eligible to ODA only the flows that are allocating to a country that are including in the dark list of developing countries and that are financing some projects and programs to promote economic and social development in the developing countries. And A is for assistance. The loans are eligible to ODA when they have a level of concessionality currently defined as integrated grants elements of 25%, calculated with a discount rate of 10%. Why we want to modernize this tracking system? We have three main objectives. One, it is to design a more credible and understandable ODA measure with a stronger focus on the grant element. The second is a better prioritization of ODA with a greater focus on country in greatest needs. And the third, and perhaps the main innovation, will be to design a new and more inclusive and comprehensive measure of donor support to development, including the non-concessional flows. Why we want to design a more credible ODA? We are discussing to build a compromise, but the two main objectives, it is one, to exclude the capital of the loans from the ODA definitions. Currently, as you know, the ODA definitions include both grants and concessional loans, including the capitals. And each year we calculate the net disbursements of ODA from donors. It means the full disbursement minus the repayment of the capital by the developing countries. Our proposal will be to focus only on the grants element and to exclude the capital of the loans that will be integrated in a second indicator. And the second proposal will be to revise this discount rate. We could go more in detail if you have some questions, but the problem that we face currently is that with the discount rate of 10%, it is very easy for donors, taking into account the condition on the financial market, to provide some loans at a rate of 4-5% to developing countries, and these loans could be eligible to the ODA without any direct budgetary cost. So we would like to reduce the discount rate, and there are several options, but one option will be to reduce this discount rate to 5%. That is the discount rate used by the IMF and the World Bank. And we would like also to propose to the DAC donors to refocus the ODA on the poorest countries. And you can see on this slide, you have on the left the LDCs, the least developed countries, and on the right, the middle-income countries, lower middle-income countries, and upper middle-income countries. And you can see that ODA currently is very important for the LDCs, the least developed countries. It represents around 40% in average of their domestic revenues and 70% of their total external flows. But while it is very low resources for upper middle income countries. In upper middle income countries, ODA is representing only 6% of the total external flows. So of course the LDCs are very dependent on ODA, while it is not so important for the middle income countries. And our proposal probably will be to recommend to the DAC donors to focus the ODA on the poorest country, the LDCs of the fragile states, for example, to focus 40-50% of the ODA on the LDCs. But to do that, we would like also to propose a new indicators that will be a second indicator to measure the total official support for development. So we will keep the ODA indicators to measure the donor efforts. We focus on the grants elements to support the poorest country. And we would like to design a new indicators integrating both ODA but also the non-concessional flows. It means the non-concessional loans, the capital of the loans, the guarantees, the equities, and all the market-based instruments used by the donors to finance the developing countries. And we think that it will be very helpful to also think about a better complementarity between the different resources and to have a better focus, again, of ODA on the poorest countries and the better use of non-concessional flows or low concessional flows to address the challenge of economic growth, to address the challenge of private investment, to address the challenge of mitigation for climate change, and of course to address the challenge of poverty eradications in middle-income countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tomasi, for a comprehensive overview of ODA and developing countries. So we have, I think, approximately 10 minutes for discussion. Takže jestli máte nějaké otázky, buď na pana Tomasiho, nebo na přítomné další řečníky, případně chcete nám něco sdělit? Nevypadá to. Pan Fukan nechce se ještě jednou zeptat takhle veřejně? Už. Jsme diskutovali vlastně o přestávce, že chtěl pan Fukan ještě vysvětlit blíž přesněji financování těch dobrovolnických aktivit Exchange, ale asi už bylo vysvětleno panem Bajádem. Ano, prosím.
Jestli teda je chvilička času, tak mám jenom 2 poznámky k firemnímu dobrovolnictví praktické. Firma, která se do toho chce pustit, by měla splnit 2 věci. Mít dobrou komunikaci a důvěru mezi zaměstnanci, středním a vyšším managementem, jinak to nefunguje. A druhou věc, kterou zjišťujeme, ta je spíš právní. V jaký právní formě ty vaši zaměstnanci půjdou pomáhat? Je to vyslání na služební cestu, převedení na jinou práci, neboli pracovně právní režim se všemi právy a povinnostmi. A nebo mu poskytnete neplacené volno a on je potom občanem v občanskoprávním režimu, jako když jdu pomáhat sousedovi trhat hrušky. Pro tyhle ty dobrovolníky potom máme speciální pojištění odpovědnosti za škody, které by spáchali, nebo za škody, které by se jim staly. Tak to jsou takové 2 praktické věci pro firemní projekty. Děkuji.
Děkuji za upřesnění. Určitě.
If I may ask Mr. Tomasi, if OECD and DAC has any concrete proposals regarding the definition of new development goals, whatever they will be called, sustainable goals or new millennium goals, regarding concrete targets which should be achieved by these goals.
Thank you. No, we didn't prepare some concrete proposal. It was a decision by the DAC members because you know that 20 years ago, the DAC played a very strategic role in the establishment of the MDGs with a famous report published in 1996. It was, the title was the development cooperation for the 21st century. And in this report, in fact, we designed a lot of goals that have been endorsed by the General Assembly in 2001. At this time, we decided to not prepare some targets and some goals because we think that it is really important that the process be managed in New York by the UN with the developing countries playing the main role. So we are focusing our works more on the how, because to be frank with you, of course in New York it will be long, it will be a difficult negotiations because it is the UN, but somewhere we know what we have to do. We know that we have to eradicate absolute poverty by 2013. We know that we have to be more active to promote sustainable development and to address climate change and environmental sustainability. Our analytic work now is more focused on the how, because the how is the most challenging questions. How to implement the MDGs and how to achieve some progress. And it is why we are working on two main sides. One, it is this development effectiveness agenda. Last week in Mexico, we had the first ministerial meeting of the Global Partnerships for Development Effectiveness. And the second, it is to focus on development finance, how to finance the development of developing countries and to have a better use of the available resources, taking also into account that we have some growing challenges to face. We have the development challenge, we have the climate challenge, we have some global public goods to finance, and it's really important to think about how to create the right incentives to increase the volume of the resources, and also how to have a better allocation of these resources among the sectors and among the developing countries. Because again, for us, of course, we would like in New York to design some universal goals, but we have also to pay attention to the differences among the developing countries now. Just to give you an example, in the list of the DAC, the developing countries eligible to ODA in the DAC, we have 149 countries. You have Chile, that has currently a GNI per capita of $13,000, and you have at the bottom the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, for which the GNI is $200. It is a very different picture compared to what it was 40 years ago. So we have also to pay attention to the poorest country and to the fragile states. And if we are working now, it is more to ask the international community to, of course, to design some universal goals, but to pay attention also to the fragile states and the poorest country, because they have some specific challenges to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Tak šance na poslední dotaz. Ano, prosím.
Hello, Barbara Latečková, UNDP. I would like to ask you one question. It's about your presentation and the specific topic, how development cooperation could support private sector involvement. I would like to ask you about your, let's say, advice to organizations such as UNDP, what they should do to support involvement of private sector. That's a big issue. And the second question, what should, let's say, a development agency do, policy makers at the ministries or NGOs do to support and involve private sector? It's still a very difficult task. So if you have any concrete, specific advices. Thank you very much.
Yes. Regarding the donor side, it's very different depending of the agency. For example, UNDP and other UN funds and programs are managing mainly some grants. So I think they have to focus to be focused on the poorest country and on how to strengthen the capacity of the national government and national administrations, how to help to create an enabling environment for business activity, how to reform the trade policies, the investment policy, etc., etc. But I think the key role to be played to promote private investment, it is by the DFIs, of course. DFIs, I mean the development finance institutions, such as IFC in Washington, or Proparco in France, KfW in Germany, because they are able to develop some market-based instruments that are very useful to develop some co-financing with some private firms, to promote some guarantees, to leverage more private investment, or to finance some private equity. A large share of the investment in the energy sector, but also in water and sanitation, could be financed by the private investment or by loans and market-based instruments. Because you know, in a lot of countries, you have some public or private companies that are in charge to generate or distribute the energy and the water. And you could extend the access to energy and water by using these market-based instruments. So we have also to think about the better division of labor among the donors agencies. I used to say that we created a very strong international system. You know that currently we have 261 international organizations or international bodies active in the field of development cooperations. 261. It's a very fragmented system. And we have around 40 to 50 bilateral agencies, 29 DAC donors plus around 20 non-DAC donors. And some non-DAC donors are playing a growing role. You know that last year, Turkey, that is an OECD country but not a DAC donors, provided 3.3 billions of US dollars of ODA. And it represented 0.45 of the Turkish GNP, more than the average of the DAC, that is 0.29. And last year, the first donor in terms of share of GNP was the United Arab Emirates. They reached 1.25% of their GNI. 1.25% of the GNI allocated to finance ODA. It is the best performer in the history. And of course, it is not a DAC non-donor. And regarding also, I think what you are doing in this city is very important, to have this dialogue with the government, with the civil servant, and with the private sectors, and with the NGOs, to think about the development cooperations and how to implement the development cooperation to achieve the best result. It's really important because I think that the private sector's representative in the north have better capacity to open a dialogue with the government and the private sector in the south, to have an open dialogue on how, again, to improve the climate business, the climate investment, and to promote more investment. And I think we could think about a win-win approach where more and more private firms from the OECD countries will invest in the south, and they will create some jobs, they will finance economic growth, they will help to transfer technology to the south, and of course, this will be a very important driver for global economic growth. Clearly, there are more and more economic opportunities in the south, and we have to use this as a leverage to accelerate and boost the economic growth and the development of the poorest countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tomasi.